guys. So now I got it off the dyno. I skipped ahead a little bit here in the video, but we had some cars running here. When with this thing running in here on unleaded gas, it gets a little fumey in here. So I pulled it off the dyno, let the shop air out, got everything aired out, so we shut the fans off and talk about it. So yeah, so you can see it's a COPO. It's a 6th gen Camaro COPO. This is a 2017, and this is our serialized #1 COPO for the 6th gen. And this is the supercharged package for the COPO. So this is the 350 cubic inch LS based LSX block, LSX heads with the Whipple supercharger. GM Performance, so you buy these cars from GM Performance, the COPOs, and it's a program that competes in the NHRA stock classes with the Cobra Jet Mustangs and the Mopar drag pack cars, the Challengers. So this car here has gone before we've done any tuning on it. So it before today, they had it at the track previously this summer, and it was going 850s. It was, I think, their best, don't hold me to it, was an 852 at 163, I think is what they ran with it. And that was straight from GM. That was straight how you'd order it from GM Performance. That's the time they were turning with it. So these cars do not come with a trans brake. They come with a pulley that's set up for 15 pounds on this engine. And that's how, GM, I think from GM, they say 880s, but, Jim, Josh, the owners, Josh was driving it. He was able to, run an 850 with it. So that's, pretty fast for a car you can buy straight from GM. So obviously now the guys that are racing these cars in the heads up classes, NMCA and NHRA, have got them way faster than that. And there's a lot of tweaks that the guys do to them, more so than even what I just did on the dyno. And we'll get to that in a second. But to make them go, I mean, they got these cars into the 7s. So since the 2017, since this 6th gen has been introduced, we can go over the engine a little more. Again, it is a 350 cubic inch. GM kind of outsources the parts for this engine, so this car still has the Whipple supercharger. And what I was getting to was, since then they have gone to the Magnuson 2650, so a similar looking charger, with the jack shaft, but the 2650, even being a smaller displacement supercharger, makes about 150 more horsepower than what this Whipple will make. The 2650s, and I've talked about them in other videos, are extremely efficient. They make less heat. Not bashing Whipple by any means. Whipples are really nice blowers. Still way capable of making really good power. For all you internet guys and YouTube guys, just Google some of the new Gen 5 Whipple stuff that goes on, like a GT350 and the 18 and up Gen 3 Coyotes. That stuff's real impressive. But anyway, we're back to the Chevy stuff here. Where this is a 350 cubic inch. It's got LSX block, LSX heads from GM Performance parts. This is stuff we buy from GM Performance. They have their own COPO headers, and yeah, those are made by, I'm just trying to remember here. They're made by American Racing, same company that we have make our headers. So really nice headers. I believe these cars use Cali's rotating assemblies, like crank and rods. Not sure on piston manufacturer. Again, all this stuff I remember. Sometimes I don't remember everything, but they do. So it is an aftermarket rotating assembly. Camshaft is 240s, 250s, something like that on the exhaust. 240s in the intake, 240s in the exhaust. Pretty choppy blower cam. I am revving this car stock. The limiter from GM, from their calibration, is 8,400. So I was revving it out to the limiter, and we'll get to the dyno graph, and it's making power all the way up there. So the surprising thing, which I think is super cool, is these engines are hydraulic lifter still. So they use a Johnson lifter that you can buy from Johnson. And again, these LS motors, it's pretty impressive what you can do with them. And yeah, there's no signs of loss of valve control on that with a hydraulic lifter at that type of RPM. You set up a valve train, right spring, right push rod, right rocker, and you can certainly take a hydraulic roller into that type of RPM. So, the other thing you might notice, if you guys haven't looked under the hood of a COPO at a show or a race, or if you own one, whatever, if you've never seen one, there's no wiper cowl. So GM Performance, these cars get basically pulled off the assembly line at the start, and they don't come with a VIN. They're not ever assigned a VIN. So there's the VIN tag, just gives you which COPO number it is. There's no VIN. You cannot license it. There's basically it's a race car only, trailered race car. So, but pretty cool piece for be able to buy a car like this from out of the catalog essentially and go racing. So Whipple 2.9 that comes with a 3.5-inch pulley. 15 and a half, maybe touching 16 pounds I'm seeing on the data logger. These cars run a Holley HP system, modern Holley EFI. Again, they outsource that too. It's got this kind of cool though. They have this carbon fiber scoop, and when you shut the hood, it's basically ram here. You can see it right in there. It's right to the throttle. There we go, right to the throttle body. So that's kind of a cool feature. Again, helps going down the track. So this big tank you're seeing here, this is, and earlier in the video you saw me dumping ice into this car. This is where I was dumping the ice, was into this tank. So Whipple supercharger, it's got an air to water intercooler inside the blower, but there's no heat exchanger on the cars. These cars just have a radiator, that's it. There's no heat exchanger. So again, because it's a drag race car, this tank, and I got the lid pretty tight, but you can kind of get the idea. I have since filled it back up with coolant. I had drained the coolant that they had in out of it and put just straight water in it, and so I could ice it between runs, between the dyno runs. So when you're at the track, you can either do that, or these dry brakes over here, you can hook up a cooler, and that cooler, so basically you're in and out, and it'll bypass, going through it'll basically pump. You can turn your pump. There's a switch in there. It'll turn the pump on, and some of those coolers have pumps on them too. But it will run the fluid out to an external cooler, like in your race trailer, or next to your race trailer, that you can plug into your generator. Some of them have generators on them, and it's like a little mini air conditioning unit. Some of them have AC units on them. Some of them are just big radiators, and it'll pump the fluid out through just basically a radiator on a stand with a fan hooked to it, and cool the coolant back down that's in this tank. Some of those cooler units, like I said, have little air conditioning units on it that will chill the fluid. It'll actually chill the fluid down to, cold, down to 30 some degrees. So 2 ways of cooling these cars down, in between runs. So the ice, Jim didn't bring me his cooler. I don't have one of those Cooling Wizard deals here. So I just did the ice thing. So I kind of, after a couple pulls, I kind of got the gist of holding my temperature at where I wanted it. I was seeing about 60 degrees to start, 100 degrees at the end of a pull. And I was able to get that pretty much exact every single run I did. I did about 6 or 7 runs on this car. And so I was able to hold coolant temperature and intake air temperatures exactly the same every single run. So I could gauge my gains, and that's, again, more dyno tuning cars. It's all about the difference between, when you're making little changes in timing and fueling, you want to be able to see a change from your tuning, not a change because you're running 100 to 130 IET versus 60 to 100 or something like that. You want to try to keep all that stuff consistent when you're doing dyno tuning. So same thing on street cars. When I'm street tuning cars or tuning street cars, ZL1s and stuff with blowers, I'm trying to keep the IETs and the coolant temps exactly the same every single run, so I can see the changes I'm seeing are from my calibration changes, not from temperature changes. So, but yeah, so that's what I was doing there with this. I was putting ice in every 2 runs or so. It was, I bought a bunch of 20-gallon or 20-pound bags of ice, and it's amazing how fast you go through ice. And when guys are at the track, I've helped buddies with race cars at the track, and same thing. They go through a lot of ice on a supercharged, or when you got an air to water system, when it's turbocharged or supercharged, you got to have a bunch of coolers full of 20-pound bags of ice on a hot summer day at the track. So yeah, then you can fill it with ice, do a couple pulls. There's a drain. You drain into a bucket, toss the water. It's just water. Fill it back up with ice. Leave a little bit of water in there. And as that blower makes heat, it's melting that ice, but it works really good. It's a decent system. It's proven. A lot of cars use it. So that's what's going on there. Pretty much otherwise it looks like an LS motor. It's got, stock LS coils. It's got, GM wires. It's got a stock oil, basically a stock LS water pump on it. It's just got block offs for the heater. This, amazingly, it's got a stock aluminum 6th gen engine cradle, but it's just got solid engine mounts. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to look at, and how like the engineers designed it and kind of took a stock body car, and how, obviously guys, chassis builders and stuff do this type of thing, but it's kind of neat to see something like this from GM. So before we look at the dynographs, and these cars, GM rates these cars. They come from GM or NHRA rated at 580 horsepower, which is kind of laughable because they, you put one of these engines on a dyno and they make 1,100 horsepower with this supercharger. I think they're about 1,100 with that pulley, that just as they come, and you can obviously pulley them down. The 325 pulley is a common upgrade on the Whipples, and obviously that Magnuson. I know with the Magnuson, these engines are making around 1,300 horsepower on an engine dyno. So, but because we're on a chassis dyno, we got big, huge. We put these big street tires on it, and those are still getting chewed up pretty good on the dyno. You can see there's rubber on the car, and there's rubber all over I got the car pulled up. You can see there's piles of rubber everywhere. We were chucking a lot of rubber off those tires, so there was a lot of friction on those rollers. So that, coupled with the stall converter that's in these cars, I just hit the battery there. We're not going to read a big power number at the rear wheels on something like this. We're just losing way too much through the torque converter and through running those big wide tires with this much friction on a roller. So we're not, we weren't even seeing a 4-digit number at the rear tire, which isn't really an accurate representation of what kind of power the car is making. But because I'm controlled, I'm keeping my temperatures the same. I'm running the car at the exact same speed, start to finish, the exact same RPM, start to finish. I can still see gains or losses by calibration changes in the fuel injection system. So, again, in this instance, we're just using the dyno as a tool. We're not trying to ultimately say this is how much power this car makes. We're just trying to show, all right, if I add timing here, I gained a little bit of power, I lost power, I added fuel or took fuel away, I gained or lost power. That's all we're trying to do here. We're not trying to say this is how much power the car makes. So again, big tires, big stall converter. It's got a loose converter, and I'll look at the data. We can look at the data logs, and I'll show you where it was coming up on the converter, and it stalls up pretty high. It comes up 6,500 RPM when I whack it on the dyno, and it's climbs to 82, and that's pretty much it. That's all I'm getting out of it. So I'm not getting a full sweep of RPM, coupled, locked 1-to-1. So these cars they come with a turbo 400 trans. So they don't come with any sort of modern transmission. Guys do take those out and do put trans brakes in them, and that's again, to be competitive in the heads up classes, you got to put the Magnuson on it. I shouldn't say bigger blower, the more efficient blower. You got to put a trans brake in them. You see they pull the transes out and change those out, and guys are pulling the motors apart and doing little tweaks and blueprint and stuff. And when I say blueprint, that's kind of a widespread term, but they're basically making the internals of the engine as efficient as possible to be competitive. Friction coatings and stuff like that. That the rules say there's nothing in the rules that say you can't do stuff like that. So these cars come factory from GM with the wheelie bars, with a chute. Obviously got to have a chute with that type of speed. I got the wheelie bars kind of cranked up so we could get it up on the dyno. And they weren't even up on the wheelie bars yet with it. They were just wheels up a little bit, and carrying the wheels out a little ways and setting them down. So yeah, that's kind of the rundown on that car and what it was, and everybody should say what it is, and maybe what you've seen. Maybe you saw some of our social media with it at Chicago Auto Show. We had this in a booth at the Chicago Auto Show, along with one of our ZL1s that we built that we did a 2650 on, and I did a video on a couple weeks ago. Krypton Green 2017 ZL1. So those two cars were in our booth, and we thought the green and the yellow together would look really good, and yeah, we got a lot of good positive feedback. So we're gonna go on to the dynographs here, and I got a bunch of my working runs up, and you can see. So, and some of you might be surprised at how low that might seem, but again, going back to, we're going through that race converter, we're going through those big tires on the rollers, and we're just not going to see very much power at the rear tire. But again, because I'm controlled, and I'm in a controlled environment, I can start it at the exact same speed, I can end it at the exact same speed as far as wheel speed and RPM. I can read a gain or a loss by making tune changes, and you can see that here. So those are about the 6 working runs I did. I did a couple partial pulls just, on the straps, make sure the straps were tight on something like this where it's really pulling hard in the dyno. I like to make sure everything is kosher before we're doing big pulls on it. So, but again, we started at 868, and I can bring up just the first run and the final, and so you can see I didn't really gain much down here. I think this is where I was getting a little bit down here. I think I was getting a little bit actual wheel slip on the dyno. The tires were actually just spinning on the dyno. Especially I started adding some timing down in here, and that's where I really started seeing the rubber starting to chunk off all over the floor. So, but I picked up a little bit up here after the torque converter starts to couple up a little bit better. Up here is where I'm a little bit more accurate in what I'm reading and stuff. And ultimately, a car like this gets finally tuned at the track. For timing and fueling, and especially timing on a supercharged car is huge on how hard you want it to hit the tires. And if it's a greasy track, maybe you want to pull some timing out. If it's the track's biting hard, maybe it cools down at night, and they got the prep down, and it's the track tightens up a little bit. Maybe we add a little bit of timing. So we just thought we'd put it on a dyno and kind of play with it a little bit, and just to see if there was anything horsepower wise up in the top end. And this is really what I was after on the dyno, was kind of the very top of the pole, just to see if there was any little bit of horsepower to be gained by tweaking the tune that comes in that Holley system from GM Performance, so from their calibrators that do the tuning on them. So I did pick up a little bit. I was able to pick up, that's what that's 16 horsepower, which on a car like this isn't a huge amount. It might be worth a couple hundreds or something like that at the top end, and maybe a mile an hour or something. But again, ultimately a car like this will be, final tuning will be done at the track. You'll have you'll have your internal data logger going on the Holley, and come back to the pits. You'll take a look at the logs and make changes based on how fast the car, looking at your incrementals on your slip. So how well it's 60 footing, or if it's not 60 footing, or how well it's back halving, whatever. That's the type of tuning you're going to do with a car like this, more so than dyno tuning. But again, we thought we'd just throw it up on the dyno and play with it a little bit, and thought it was pretty cool. So kind of get a shot of the interior. It's got a reverse valve body 400, so with a typical race automatic shifter. It's got this switch panel. I got the battery turned off right now, but so ignition turns the Holley on. Fuel pump, that's the intercooler pump, that's the fan, and there's some headlights and taillights you can turn on. Again, that comes right from GM. Actually, I'll power it up and you guys can kind of see the gauges. If you guys haven't ever seen one of these COPOs before, I think they're super cool, but just that you can buy something like this. I mean, they are pricey, but gauges are all, they're auto meter, but they have the bow tie in them and stuff. And so you get a tack with a shift light, fuel pressure, oil pressure, water temperature, and trains temperature. So kind of nice backlit. Obviously there's no 6-gen dash anymore. It's just like a panel with the odometer gauges in it. Is pretty much all it is. They got the gauges out of there and just put those in, and so it's pretty simple. No, the HVAC controls are there, but most of the stuff is pretty stripped out. It's got a race seat in it with COPO. I might not be able to see this stuff. It's pretty dark, but obviously harnesses, 850 cert cage, no rear seat obviously. These cars have a 4-link in them. Rear end, so there's no more like factory IRS. That's completely taken out. You might not be able to really see it because again it's dark, but if my camera will automatically adjust, probably not. But wheelie bars, 4-link, panhard,
9-inch coil, strange coilovers. They kind of, I mean, it's kind of, you know, the stock, obviously there's a fuel cell in the trunk, there's no more saddle tank, it's got a one-piece aluminum drive shaft. They add some cross members and stuff to the underside of it. They're pretty extensively modified from GM. It's pretty cool to look at one. And they work really well. I mean, you could certainly take one of these chassis and apply a bunch more power to them, and they'd work nicely. So we took a look at those dyno graphs, and I got my laptop over here in my toolbox, and here's another cool car we're working on, a 67 Chevelle twin turbo LS. As we walk by, maybe just. Sorry guys, it might take a sec here, but so this is my video editor. So yeah, so I got this tune up. So yeah, I mean, this is I can open up that last data log if I can find it here. Data logs, COPO 9. So here, so this is Holley. This is Holley software. So I'm using the version 5. That's what you'd use. You know, that's their latest stuff. That's what you'd use with their touchscreen systems and stuff like that. Maybe a Dominator. Use the version 5. Just like any other standalone, you got Spark tables. You got Spark. I can kind of open all this stuff up here. So Spark table. Typical. You know, if you've never seen Holley before. So this is map, vacuum and boost, RPM, and then you got all these cells that have timing figures in them, you know. So I got it idling around 36 degrees to kind of stabilize the idle a little bit. I added a bunch of timing down here. If you open up the I'm not sure what I changed there, but don't want to save changes to it. If you open up the stock timing table, or how it came from GM Performance, you can see this big row of 15 degree. That's basically where the car, if you come up on the throttle, hit the throttle, car comes up on basically on the starting line. The timing is only 15 degrees, and I think I know they do that to soften the launch and try to, you know, just to get you to start so you're not blowing the tires off. So I added a bunch of timing there, and after I did that, that's when I was really starting to see the rubber coming off the tires all over the floor, because and again, you're not going to really see it on a real dyno graph trying to push through that converter, because it's just going to push against the converter even harder and stall the converter even harder. So sometimes you don't see gains, and we've seen that before in some of our other cars that we do when we do like ZL1s and stuff with single disc non-locking converters that we don't lock in the dyno. Cars will go faster at the track, but on the dyno it doesn't really show much of a gain, and we pulley it down or something like that. And that's just kind of, sometimes a chassis dyno can't always be used for a full tuning tool on a car like this, and because sometimes there's, you know, stuff is with torque converters and with loose torque converters, and that's why you probably don't see a lot of videos with cars like this on chassis dynos. You know, hub dynos maybe. Just because a hub dyno, you're not dealing with tires on a roller and you're not seeing losses there. The hub dynos are more accurate for a car, you know, for a race car like this with a race style transmission and a race style torque converter. So, but yeah, that's that big hole in the timing that they leave, and I did increase that, and we'll see what happens at the track. If we got a tight track and it's hooking, it'll probably go a couple tenths faster just with what I did, and just a smidge of power and just getting the car to leave that much harder. So we can go back to my file here, and so yeah, this Holley system, you know, you got this is a fuel table. Then, you know, similar thing. It's kind of based on these kind of arbitrary numbers based on VE, but yeah, you got your map and you got your RPM, and this is, you know, if you wanted to add fuel, you'd raise these numbers. If you want to take fuel away, you'd subtract numbers. So subtract from this table. So you can, on the Holley, you can look at it in a 3D graph, which is kind of colorful and cool looking. Sometimes this is helpful to see if you got holes and stuff. This fuel table is pretty smooth, and I pretty much left it alone.
on a drag car like this, on a street car, you'd be changing, all these cells you'd be hit because you're driving on the street and you're dynamic. You're up and down in the RPM. If you got a manual transmission car, you're shifting through gears and you're up and down and boost and stuff. But drag car, this car, you fire it up at idles in the pits, you drive it up to the staging lanes, do a burnout, stage the car. As long as it's close, as long as the wide open throttle stuff is really all you're after. And it was pretty close. So I played with the fueling a little bit, but it was more of the spark was really what I was playing with, and that's really ultimately where I gained that little bit of power, was just adding a smidge of timing. It took another degree to going to have timing and made a smidge more power. So I left it there, and it liked it a little bit more timing. So those are kind of the graphs. Obviously, these Holley systems are super powerful. There's tons of stuff you can do with them. I have most of this stuff stripped down. I don't have a lot of the individual configurations. You can add, like if you want to add more individual configurations for boost or drive-by-wire or nitrous or traction control, transmission control, water methanol control, you can add all those types of controls in these system, or in this EFI system. It's pretty cool. I really like the Holley stuff. One other thing I really like on these is there's a learn table. So what that does is it takes feedback off the wideband sensor, and so basically you can have the wideband sensor turned on, it's making changes, it's watching the wideband sensor and basing it, kind of looking at it against this desired air-fuel ratio table. So if you're idling and I'm commanding 14:1 at idle, or roughly, it's idle, I have it idling about 1300 or so. So 14:1 at idle. If it's 13.5 to idle, it will, on this learn table, it would have subtracted fuel. And so basically this table will build a correction factor, and then you can just click this transfer learning to base. It'll transfer that correction factor percentage wise onto your base fuel table. So it'll apply the correction factor to this table automatically, instead of having to go cell by cell, row by row, like some of the earlier standalones you had to do that, and it took so long to do, and it was really a pain in the ass. Especially if you're starting from scratch with no base cal. Holley has a ton of different base calibrations that are really close. You tell them, you say injector size, engine cubic inch, and that's all like in your ECU configuration. You can say engine size, number of cylinders, speed density, because we're using a MAP sensor, what type of wideband you're using, what type of fuel, and it'll build you a base cal, and it's pretty close from there. And then from there you can just turn that learning table on, that learning function, and it'll start to automatically learn. And you can keep just applying those corrections to that base fuel table, and in a couple hours you can have a calibration that's really close, even for a street car. So this is the Holley data log system. Again, it's in a line form, kind of like some of the HP tuner stuff maybe you've seen on some of my other videos. I was kind of using this one. Again, it's logging many channels. So it's logging all this stuff that's checked. So these are all different views, different configurations of logging channels that you can bring up. So you can see it's logging quite a few different channels here. All these green checks are what it's logging, and then these are just different preset graphs that you can look at. Drag. This is all stuff Holley gives you, and I'll kind of tweak on these a little bit so I can kind of see stuff that I want to look at individually. So this one labeled sensors, I kind of brought up some of the stuff on it that I wanted to see. But yeah, so that blower, so 205 kPa. That's that green line. This kind of yellowish tan line, that's the air fuel. And you can see how that was kind of moving around up and down. I have that Holley correction. I do have the closed loop turned on even at wide open throttle, and I actually narrowed that. It was really jagged. The first couple of runs I did, it was really moving around a lot. It was correcting and then pulling, adding and subtracting a little too much. And it's kind of a rough tune from GM. So I lowered the threshold down to about 5%, so it can only correct about, because it was some of the spikes and dips were, I was seeing 12.5 and then 11.5, 12.5. So because it was so close, now we're 11.7, 12.0. So made it a little happier. Timing, I did add some timing down low. That's about 24. But again, you can see that, okay, so this is about 6,900 RPM. That's at the start of the pull. So you can see how much that torque converter is slipping. I mean, that's near the start of the pull. You can see this red line is RPM. So that's right when I hit the throttle, it comes up. And that's how much the torque converter is stalling up. And that's at the start of the pull. So I'm starting my pulls, again, because we don't lock up, it's a race converter, you're not locking it up. And that's 83, oh, sorry here.
Top of the pole is 8350. So a lot of slip in the converter. Again, that's why we're reading a lower than expected number on the dyno, is because of how much that torque converter is allowed to slip. So, but for a drag race car, that's what you need. You want to bring it up in the converter. You want to get right to the meat of the power band right as you hit the throttle when the light comes down, and right into the meat of the throttle, so you can get the car off the line the fastest. And that's, you know, that makes the car faster at the drag strip is a 60-foot time. So yeah, you can see, I mean, it came up right to like 6,900, and that's really where it started to level off. So you know, 6,500 there. So that kind of explains right there why we're not seeing like 1,000 wheel or 1,100 wheel when the engine's making, you know, 1,200 horsepower. You'd maybe expect to see 1,000 at the tire, but again, because that torque converter is just, we're slipping so much through the torque converter, we're just losing a lot of what the rear tire is going to read for horsepower. But again, because I can repeat it and repeat the speed every single time, I can, you know, I make changes to the tune, and I was seeing small gains. So I kept going with it, but again, it won't be the ultimate end all tune for this car, but by any means. We'll do, you know, most of the tweaking on a car like this is going to be at the drag strip. So make a pass, look at your incrementals, you know, look at your 60 foot, look at your 330 foot. Look at your 1/8 mile, all that stuff, you know, mile an hour times, and go from there. And, you know, that's really how you ultimately make a car faster at the drag strip is data from the strip. You know, look at your time slip, and you data log at the track just like this, and you look at your logs, and obviously you'd be shifting through gears, first gear, second gear, third gear, and you'd be looking at air fuels in each gear and making changes, you know, to it as needed. So yeah, that's kind of that's the Holley data logging. Again, it's in a line format, just like HP tuners, like in some of my other videos. That's why I like logging. You can do heat maps and scatter plots and all that stuff with Holley. There's tons of different stuff, but this is the simplest way. And, you know, what was it doing at, you know, 7,300 RPM? You can oil pressure, baro, pulse width. I mean, there's tons of stuff you can add and subtract. You can get this thing all busy with lines, and you can add all sorts of stuff to it. So super powerful software. I mean, guys run threes in the quarter mile on the Dominator setups. It's pretty much what this is. I mean, you know, it's right now, I would say Fuel Tech and Dominator are the two big EFI systems that guys are using in the real fast stuff. You know, guys that are running mid fours down into the high threes are using this type of software. So really powerful. You can make a lot of horsepower with it, and you can go all the way down and make 300 horsepower on it. That's why it's so flexible. You know, it's really a flexible system, and how many different types of engines and stuff you can control with it. So I really like it. Just thought I'd show you guys a little bit of it, and so you can kind of get an idea of doing a little bit of standalone tuning and being extra cool. You know, having that COPO, play with that COPO on the dyno is really cool, because I'm, you know, working at Nicky here, I'm a Camaro guy. I got a Camaro, and I'm kind of a fan of the 6th gen Camaro, so it's cool. It's a cool deal. But yeah, otherwise, that's probably about it for this video. You guys are kind of seeing the shop here. I've never really done a shop tour. We got a bunch of other projects down the pipe. We got this Duster here. We got that Chevelle I just showed you. There's a Jeep I did a video on that. A little Fiat up on the hoist. That's Stefano's dad's. We got this SR3 mid-year Corvette project going on right now that we're in the middle of fabbing up all sorts of stuff for. Yeah, we're doing a lot. That's a big project, and we're in the middle of that, getting that ready for spring. So and I got that 67 Chevelle I walked past just. But yeah, anyway, that's a long enough video, I think. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll talk to you next time.